Well, hello, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I will be your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night, we talked about How Long Can You Tread Water, which was the title of one of my favorite childhood comedians, Mr. Bill Cosby. It's a really excellent sketch he used to do where God is talking to Noah and trying to convince him to build an ark. Noah, of course, just figures it's his neighbors, making fun of him, so, playing a joke on him. And he's not going to fall for the gag. And then it starts raining. I don't think I was actually ever a child. When I was young, there were only 3 places in the world where I saw kindness as a way of life, where I saw that intelligence was something to be valued and not scorned or ridiculed or degraded. Only 3 places where I actually experienced happiness. 2 of those places were television shows. And of course the other was my record album. I had several records of the comedy routines of Mr. Bill Cosby. Wit, intelligence, good-natured humor, kindness, compassion, tolerance. The only places where, as a little person, again, I don't think I was ever a child, these were the only places I ever saw these things. And they were concepts so far outside of my daily world that there really wasn't a comparison. So I know that television can be a force for good. I'm living proof of that. And I know that technology can be a force for good in our lives. It's supposed to be. And again, I'm living proof of that. Television is the only place in my life when I was little where I saw people being nice to each other just because it was the right thing to do. There was no reason to be filled with hate and cruelty and viciousness. There just wasn't a reason. Of course, I never thought there was a reason either, but there were more of them than there was of me. And the definition of sanity is what the majority thinks is right. So I was in the minority of 1. So where I came from, hate and cruelty and viciousness and cowardliness and lying and cheating and stealing were the norm. And when I was very little, I went one day to the old grandmother of the tribe. Her daughter was the tribal leader. I went to the old grandmother. I said, "Please, can you take me to the hospital?" And she said, "Why?" I could not have been more than 8 years old. I really couldn't have been. And I said, "There's something wrong with me." And I told her what was wrong with me. I see all these things happening, and I know they're wrong, and yet everyone's doing them. So, there's more of you than there are of me. So obviously, there's something wrong with me. I need to see a doctor. And the old grandmother of the tribe started to wail. They did that a lot. And when she managed to stop wailing long enough, she explained to me that she would never take me to a doctor because other members of her tribe, her extended family, had said the same things before, and they had gone to seek medical help, obviously psychiatrists. And the moment that they had gone to see psychiatrists, they had fled her tribe, ran away from her and her people as fast as they could, and she never saw them again. And apparently in her old country, wherever that was, having daughters was a curse from God. And she had produced 2 daughters. One of them ended up being the tribal leader, and the other one apparently had been gang raped by some of her own clan members. And she had gone crying and screaming to her mother for help, for love, for support. And her mother had told her, "Well, you're just a girl, you don't deserve any better." And that, of course, broke her younger daughter's mind. And it was really quite ugly to see. So to say that I understand the concepts of what it is to exist in hatred is, well, obvious. We all have free will. We all have a choice. And I chose not to follow in their footsteps, which of course is why they had to do their best to destroy me. And so, again, the only places I ever saw kindness or intelligence or tolerance or patience, the only place I ever saw the strong defending the weak was on television. It was the original Star Trek show by Gene Roddenberry, and a British children's show called Doctor Who. Completely different concepts of shows. Star Trek had a budget. Doctor Who didn't have a budget. They had, cardboard sets and things. But both of these television shows had the same concept, that it was okay to be intelligent. It was okay to be kind. That kindness was the preferred way of life. That compassion and tolerance were good things. And being a lying, cheating, thieving coward, there was no reason for it. In my daily life, all I ever knew was hate. Hate for the sake of hate. I mean, I started working for these families, these tribes, these gangs, where I had been placed when I was 5 years old. At the age of 5, I found a box to stand on, put it in front of the stove, and started teaching myself to cook. I cooked breakfast for the tribe that I was in, having just been dumped in the street outside and left to die by my family, quote unquote. And they made it very apparent, this family that had taken me in, that I was a terrible burden to them, and they didn't want me. So I decided I better do something to be of value, and I taught myself how to cook breakfast. And since that time, I've taught myself a lot of skills. I know how to do so many different things. Over the years, I learned carpentry. I'm a really good carpenter. Gardening, I can make anything grow. Small-scale farming, not a problem. Plumbing, auto mechanic, boat mechanic. I can paint houses. I hate painting. To this day, I hate painting more than I can say. I can do drywall. I do roofing, electrical, ditch digging. Of course, then I got into computers and educating people how to use computers. Taking computers apart, putting them back together. I can work on servers. And I even know how to dig a ditch. I can dig a ditch in solid rock, because I've done all these things. And so as the years dragged on, not really being alive, really, but being tormented and tortured by these tribes I'd been placed with, the CIA was paying them to keep me alive, some part of the project or operation, quote unquote. I don't think I actually lived up to the CIA's expectations. None of the other victims of these CIA projects that I've met have ever lived up to the CIA's expectations. We were all supposed to have been either sex slaves or mass murderers, rapists. We were supposed to be all these horrible, horrible things. And none of us really lived up to the CIA's expectations of us. The other victims I've encountered, I'm happy to say, quite a few of them managed to adjust to a human, quote-unquote, life. I'm 53 years old. I'm still trying. But I have to admit, I learned how to work. I learned how to survive. And I learned how to take a punch. I also learned to move very quietly. And when somebody would, stab me in the back, I would never scream out, because I knew as a child, as they were breaking my bones, that if I had screamed out and they even thought that the neighbors had heard me scream, they would not have stopped, even no matter what the CIA was paying them. I actually wish I had screamed out, but that's a different story. And so I watched these tribes, these groups, gangs, these thugs of white street trash, CIA street thugs, U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence street trash. Again, I thought I must be insane. Everything they did made no sense to me. And I mentioned it quite often to them. And being sort of slow myself, not being very bright, I never quite linked the fact that I mentioned something out loud to them that made no sense to me, something I had seen them do with my own eyes. I never equated that to the beatings and the broken bones or being beaten into unconsciousness. I never put those two parts of the puzzle together. It took me several decades, because I just figured I was crazy. because they were doing all these horrible, terrible, vicious, cruel things. Not only to strangers, anybody would fall for it, but to each other. And I just thought that was wrong. But again, the majority wins. It was normal for them. And I remember over the years, I was cooking all the time. Every holiday I would prepare these huge dinners year after year. And I watched as these various factions of the tribe, various factions of the gangs, they would do everything they could possibly do to convince anybody they could how wonderful they were. They wanted desperately to convince anyone they could find how rich they were, how important they were, how well connected they were. And time again, it was very obvious to me, a small child, a whipped dog, a beaten animal, that they weren't impressing anybody. No one. I mean, they would actually pull people off the streets, invite them into their house to impress them with their home and their big dinners and things. Nobody was ever impressed. Ever. They were sort of startled and stunned and, well, disgusted. I mean, at one point, one of these tribes ran flight schools, small airplanes. They taught foreign students how to fly. I guess the idea was eventually they'd be flying, jumbo jets. And I remember one Christmas, they had lots of students from Saudi Arabia. And they dragged these poor students who were trying so hard to be polite. I think there were like 15 or 20 of them. They dragged them all the way into the desert to this house where I was working at, so that I would cook them this huge dinner. Of course, no one bothered to tell me there were 15 other people coming. So as usual, I was making do. And I still to this day remember the looks on the faces of these flight students from Saudi Arabia, who were obviously very cultured people, very intelligent, very well educated, and who came from a level of society that where humanity was actually valued. And I could still see them in my mind's eye decades later. The uncomfortable disbelief that they had being stuck for a few hours in the home of these really, truly foul, really, truly stupid, clueless people. And the other event that I watched holiday after holiday when these tribes would get together, they didn't get together because they liked each other, not because they cared about each other. They got together every possible holiday just to hurt each other. There was some sort of grading scale they used, and I never did catch on to what the grading scale was or how they awarded points. But apparently, the goal of the holidays was to make as many people cry as possible. And that gave you some sort of status for that period of time, I guess. I mean, I tried so hard to fit in with these people for many years. I tried to fit in whatever tribe or group or gang I was with. And I would spend months shopping for just the exact right present for each of them. I'd save up my pennies, literally. Because I loved Christmas. I had a hope. There's that word again. The two words in the English language that will destroy us. Hope, faith. I had hope that it was a small child, a little person's hope that maybe this year, just maybe this year, these people would change and realize how important they were to each other, and it would be nice, it would be good to be nice to one another. I had hope that that would happen, and I had faith, the two most ugly words in the English language. I had faith that if I tried ever so hard, they would realize you don't have to be mean. Maybe they might even be nice to me. It never happened. And all those gifts that I had so lovingly saved my money for, and for months and months and months shopped for until I found the exact right present for each and every one of them. Every time, those gifts were thrown back into my face with disgust. But you know what? I'll give them credit. They never did forget me. I'm someone who cooked, meals for 30 people at a pinch. I actually got down to where I could do a dinner for 30 people on Christmas Day, and over an 8-hour period. It would actually only take 1 hour of physical labor. It's planning. And of course I did it all alone. They couldn't be bothered. I was just someone they, forgot in the kitchen or was there to do the serving. But I have to give them credit. They never forgot how much I loved Christmas. They never forgot the hope I had that them, me, maybe all of us, could actually be nice to each other. They never forgot that. And every holiday, they went out of their way to make certain that that hope I had for Christmas never came true. And they tried for years. And they passed me from family to family, to tribe, from gang to gang. And every year they did their best to destroy the spirit of Christmas for me. And one year they finally succeeded. They managed to kill the spirit of Christmas in me forever. And they were so proud. I can equate it to sit down at the table, reach for your cup of coffee, and you're about to take a drink of it, and then you realize it's not your cup of coffee, the cup's cold. Then you realize the cup is only half full, and the coffee has been in there for days, and it's stale. And then you realize that someone had put out a cigarette in the coffee. That's what Christmas means to me today, thanks to these people. And so for me, 2 television shows taught me humanity. 2 television shows taught me the importance of intelligence and kindness and defending the weak against the strong who might be evil. So I personally know that television can be a force for good. And one really, truly brilliant comedian taught me the joy of laughter. I actually got to say thank you to the son of the creator of Star Trek in person. His father had been very old, Gene Roddenberry, and had died before I could write him a letter and say thank you. But one day I was introduced to the son of the creator of Star Trek, Eugene Roddenberry, and to his business partner. And they allowed me to say thank you to his father and his work on camera. They were making a documentary. And they invited me later to the closing party of the last Star Trek TV show. I think it was Star Trek Enterprise. And to those 2 television shows and to Mr. Bill Cosby, I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm also sorry to say that it looks like it started to rain for you and me. And so tonight I thought we might chat about the zombie effect. And this is variously called mind control. You can call it social engineering. Back in the 1960s, it was called a Manchurian Candidate. It's simply the breaking or the separating of the rational mind, the thinking mind, our logical part of our brain. It's the separation of our rational mind from our emotional mind. And I will use as words like spirit or soul. I'm just mentioning them in passing. No religious connotations whatsoever. But we do, each of us have a rational mind and an emotional mind. The rational mind says, reasonably, this should happen because it makes sense that this should happen in a certain sequence of events. The emotional mind says, why would anybody do that? That hurts. You've hurt me. Mind control, as far as I can tell, is the shattering of the rational mind from the emotional mind. And in between that break, between the rational mind and the emotional mind, that's where you insert the program. It then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the place I saw the most successful work of our masters, the CIA, of this social engineering mind control Manchurian Candidate thing, is again New Zealand. New Zealand was terribly educational for me. Horrifying every single day, but terribly educational. Now, of course, the CIA is doing massive mind control in the United States. They've managed to turn women against men, blaming men for all the problems that women have in American society, not really realizing that it's actually the Queen of England and Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands who own the United States through various corporations. And the most basic rule of war is divide and conquer. Get your enemies to fight each other, and you just go in and clean up the mess afterwards. But New Zealand, since it's just an island, 2 little islands in the middle of nowhere, very small population, descendant of white invaders. There were no settlers. They invaded New Zealand. Did their best to wipe out the Maori people who were there for, I guess, hundreds, if not thousands of years. They themselves had wiped out the previous white population. But New Zealand was custom-made for their mind control experiments. And I'm sure they call it something like, Operation New Zealand or Project New Zealand. They, Operation Project. They have to have, highfalutin names for this stuff. But honestly, doesn't matter what it's called. It worked extremely well, and it's working extremely well today. And it's doing exactly what it was meant to do. Make money for the servants. Our masters only care about power, but the servants need money. So it had 3 goals: make money, centralize power, and hurt people. And personally, I was so tired of being in the United States of America in corporate, I just wanted to leave. And so I started looking around the world for a better place, a good place to live. I checked out Australia, Canada, the UK, Ireland, Belize. Belize is a little tiny country in the Caribbean that by the time I was ready to leave, the U.S. government had seized control of that, so that was no longer possible. I looked at lots of places, and I finally settled on Australia. And there were a variety of factors for my decision, not the least of which is I only spoke English, and frankly not that very well. But I still to this day wish I had a capacity for languages, because that would have given me access to countries I was really interested in. Several in South America, Japan, Asia, China, Hong Kong, places, But being a victim of the American school system, I only speak 2 languages, English and bad English. So here I am. Australia seemed, at the time, to be a good choice. The only thing that was holding me back about Australia was the fact that there's more poisonous, dangerous, and deadly creatures in Australia than the rest of the world combined, and it's mostly desert. And as I grew up in the desert, and I hate the desert, and yes, it's okay to hate the desert, or you could rather say that the idea of being in the desert again makes me ill and leaves me cold, and the fact the creatures I discovered out in the desert were quite astonishing. I discovered a variety of lots of snakes, tarantulas bigger than my hand, termites, well, basically the size of small chihuahuas. I was kind of tired of the desert. But then I heard about this place called New Zealand. And the most dangerous thing on New Zealand, I was told, were hobbits. I figured I could take out a hobbit or 2. I understand they make, they're excellent when cooked well. And then I began to investigate. I asked questions. That's what I do. And so I read about their vast forests and their beautiful wildlife and the environmentally aware government that wanted to preserve nature there. I went on to read about how there was a college on every street corner, and that the average New Zealander was so highly educated, some of the most highly educated people in the world, and that their government was run by highly trained, highly professional people, and the fact that they were desperate for high-end professionals to move into the country in all industries, because their own professionals were leaving to go to bigger countries where you could get better pay. And finally, they were friendly. And they were welcoming to strangers, and all foreigners were welcome as family, a tribal thing. And I thought, wow, highly educated. A country run by highly experienced professional people, eco-friendly, and the people were friendly? Wow, again. And so I talked to people in New Zealand for 6 years. I even made a trip down there in 2003 where I'd already been programmed by the advertising campaigns to a point where I just simply ignored all the realities of the situation that I saw. I mean, I was so desperate to be around real people. And so I'm in Auckland for 2 weeks. And beautiful girls on the streets of Auckland were stopping to talk to me. And this had never happened to me before. You don't make even eye contact with women in the States unless you want to be, thrown in jail and pistol whipped by the cops. I just figured these beautiful girls who were stopping to talk to me in Auckland, no matter where I went, were on drugs, they were drunk, or they were crazy, or they were going to get me alone just so they could, pull a knife and gut me from my wallet. Again, I'm from the United States. I know how single men are treated in the United States. And it wasn't until I was on the airplane heading back into the hell that is the United States, and this is 2003, it wasn't until I was on the plane flying back to the States, flying back to California, when it dawned on me what the truth was. Those beautiful women, those beautiful girls who were stopping in the street to talk to me, they were just being women. That's what real women do. And I was just stunned out of my mind. I mean, wow, again. At that point, I was sold. I was sold on the story, even though it had very obvious holes in it as I look back. On the 14 days I was in Auckland, I ignored the unbelievable violence I read about. 7 people in one suburb in one day were butchered in their homes because of a drug deal that had gone bad. And for me, I'm from Los Angeles and New York. We lose 7 people every second. Of course, there are 300 million of us and less than 4 million New Zealanders, so the ratio per capita murder rate is unbelievably high. It turns out it's one of the most violent countries in the world. But again, I had been programmed for 6 years. Everyone I talked to in New Zealand told me, yes, we need you desperately. Come, please, why aren't you here? And how they needed high-end professionals to work there because they were looking for a bright future. And how beautiful girls would stop me in the street to talk to me, which is what real women do in real countries. They were looking to build a future. Me too. So I fell for it, as did many, 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 many foreigners, many of whom I've met and their families. And of course, once I got there, even as the plane was landing, I knew that I had been lied to. I paid for my ignorance, my stupidity, and not letting my rational mind guide me, but allowing my emotional mind to say, no, that didn't happen. And I managed to lose everything in the world that I treasured or loved. But as I always do, in between periods of unbelievable shock and sitting in my little room at night crying myself to sleep wondering what the hell's going on, I did put the pieces together. It took me almost 3 years. But I finally figured out what was going on. I talked to everybody I could talk to. I talked to natives. I had more friends who were New Zealanders than any other foreigner I know. Because New Zealanders don't like anyone. They don't like each other. They certainly don't like themselves. But I was one of the few foreigners who actually had lots and lots of New Zealand friends, and I had lots and lots of foreign friends. And I talked to everybody. I even talked to New Zealanders who had gone offshore, worked for many, many years, became really good in their professions, and came back to New Zealand, at which point the native, quote-unquote, New Zealanders considered them to be foreigners as well. And all foreigners are a threat. And I don't give up easy. From where I'm from, you don't give up easy. Where I'm from, if you turn your back on somebody, they'll just stab you in the back so many times you don't even know what happened. And it's hard for me to admit defeat. But at a certain point, you just have to say, this is never going to work. Because again, they outnumber me. Again, madness, gibbering madness of virtually everybody in charge is normal. That's sanity. Whereas me, all alone, I'm the insane one. I'm thinking it's a problem, solve the problem, problem solved. No. Hide the problem, blame strangers, take no responsibility, run away and hide. And hurt as many people as you can. Gee, this sounds familiar to me. This is what I grew up with. So after 3 years in New Zealand, I fled once again from the place I thought was home because I was wrong. The rational mind sees reality. The emotional mind tries to talk you out of it. And too many times it's the emotional mind that we let guide us. And that's where we get into massive amounts of trouble. This is why our world is today what it is, at least in the West. Now in New Zealand, amongst the many, many things that I discovered, was that the top 65 New Zealand-based multinational corporations and the New Zealand government were paying $1 million a month to a major international advertising agency to create the illusion of what we think New Zealand is, to present that illusion to the world. Now, luring innocent professional people to their doom is just an added bonus. It's apparently an entertaining side benefit. The real reason that this advertising campaign is run, $1 million a month, is to spread the word all over the world, the illusion of what New Zealand is. But the real purpose of New Zealand is very simple, to launder money. It's a very well executed scheme, and many, many international corporations and lots of smaller international investors use it very successfully. I know 2 of them personally. And it's really profitable if you're at the top of the food chain. You know, the Mandarin class of New Zealand. It's really good for them. But for guys like me at the bottom, it's a disaster. And I personally know hundreds of high-end professionals and their families. People I know personally who are trapped in New Zealand in complete poverty. Others still think they have a chance to make a difference. There is one man from Colombia who's been there for 30 years. He's an architect, very skilled. He went over first, sent for his wife and daughter, thinking he was going to work as an architect. And to this day, he still believes he can make it work. They have nothing left. They were financially destroyed. They were crippled. To this day, they are shunned and hated and despised by the New Zealanders. But they live in hope, and they have faith for a better future. The rational mind has been turned off completely. The emotional mind is ruling. It's the zombie effect, and it's quite alive and well in New Zealand. Manchurian Candidate, social engineering, mind control, doesn't matter what you call it. It's being used wonderfully successfully in New Zealand. There is one of many events, but one night in particular, I remember there's a bar, very popular bar, called the Southern Cross in Wellington. And a friend of mine, a foreigner, dragged me to a screening there of Zeitgeist, a very, very good movie about what our masters are doing. And there were 50 New Zealanders sitting in the audience watching this movie. And at the end of the movie, the guy running the thing, who obviously didn't know what he was talking about, was asking for questions. So I started talking about what I knew because my friend was poking me. And these 50 people who were seated at the Southern Cross, staring at the pull-down screen, I was to their left, leaning against a little partition, and my friend was standing to my left. So I began to talk. And the moment I began to talk, all 50 people, I'm figuring there were 50, they were like puppets on a string. They were like marionettes at Disneyland on a mechanical pole. The machine's moving it, so you move the pole, all 50 heads move at exactly the same time. All 50 of these heads swiveled to look at me at exactly the same time. Their heads all tilted exactly at the same angle. And they all had the exact same blank, unthinking, unfeeling, completely emotionless look on their faces. It looked like their faces had been painted on. Each one had the same unconscious expression as they stared at me. And my friend, the foreigner, the guy standing to my left, standing right next to me, he saw them swivel their heads at me as I was talking. I thought he was going to start screaming. The look of absolute terror on his face. He had never seen this before. It's a very natural reaction for a normal human being when being confronted by a room filled with what, frankly, were zombies. I mean, it was literally a scene out of a zombie horror movie. Except for the part where, normally they would have stood up and tried to eat our brains. They just sat there. But they were zombies. They were pre-programmed to shut down their higher brain function when confronted with reality of any kind. So Zeitgeist, the movie, had set them up, and then I'm talking, and I guess it was just the effect of the movie, and they're looking at me, and I'm confirming the movie and giving them a little more detail. But they were zombies. The rational mind had been disconnected from the emotional mind. And I guess the short circuit makes you a zombie. I had another experience here in Europe where my rational mind, when I met my soulmate, who I was told I would meet, I was told by this old witch who sent me to Europe that I would meet the true loves of my life, and that I would finally find my true job. And so I met my soulmate. She was my soulmate. There's nothing I can do, as disgusting as I find her, about that. I met her girlfriend, her lover. And they both really enjoyed leading me on, teasing me, playing with me. They really enjoyed hurting me. And they really enjoyed hurting me because they could. And to this day, my spirit, my soul, I hate those words, my emotional mind, to this day, and it's been almost a year now, every day asks the same question: how could anybody do that? Well, my rational mind knows the answer. It was fun. Because they could. Because they enjoyed it. My rational mind knows that they've done this to men before, and they're doing it to men now. My emotional mind says, how could anybody do that? And it's this break between the rational mind, the reasoning mind, our logical awareness, and the emotional mind, the spirit, the soul. Again, sorry to use these kind of words, but it's just for reference. There's no religion involved in any of this. But it's that break between the rational mind that sees the world the way it really is, and the emotional mind that's our buffer from dealing with the reality. It's that break that allows us to be programmed, to be true cattle, as these people were at the Southern Cross in Wellington, New Zealand. So I finished my little speech there at the Southern Cross. The zombies, the New Zealand audience, again, just like 50 puppets, all on the same string. Like 50 marionettes with the same metal rod attached to a winch. Someone started cranking the winch, and their faces swung around to the front of the room again. No emotion, no conscious awareness, nothing. And my foreign friend standing next to me, he was so scared he couldn't even react. I mean, he was rooted to the ground. And I honestly, to this day, do not blame him. I mean, I think back on it. I mean, I'm very impressed that he did not scream out in terror like a little girl. That would be the most normal reaction for a normal human being. If I had been a normal human being, I would have done exactly the same thing. It was terrifying for him. For me, it was just another day. This is not who I wanted to be, I'll tell you right now. That this would be a normal day for me, facing 50 zombies, and not batting an eye, and not thinking it was odd. I don't want to be this guy. But for some reason I am. I'm wondering if I can even talk to anybody anymore. I seem to experience things happened to me or done to me that no one else seems to experience. Or if they do, they don't notice. I'm guessing a lot of the experiences you and I chat about, you've lived through. I suspect it. It's just a suspicion, a hunch I have. But quote-unquote normal people ignore it because they go with their emotional mind. Because somehow they have to figure out a way of just getting through the day. They've got to go to work. They got to dress the kids for school. They got to kiss their wife goodbye. They got to get to work and do their job. They got to get home, pick up the kids from school. You got to go shopping for food. You got to make dinner. You got to figure out a way of getting through the day. And that's what our emotional mind does. It's that cushion against reality that gets us through the day. But again, that gets us back to mind control. I'm guessing the only things we can say is perhaps repeat the mantras. The mantra we came up with, foreigners in New Zealand, whenever we would meet each other, whether we'd ever met before or not, when foreigners met, we never said, "Hi, how are you? How are you today? Good to see you. Nice to meet you." The very first thing that foreigners would say to each other in New Zealand is, "You did nothing wrong." Because part of the programming of New Zealanders is to blame the victim. So we got, and this was totally unconscious on our part, we just would meet each other and say, "You did nothing wrong." We had to reinforce reality. We were the victims. We were lured there to be destroyed. That was it. You did nothing wrong. So I'm guessing that's a good mantra to repeat to yourself, if I could suggest. And of course, our traditional mantra, our mantra against black magic, I listen to what you say, I watch what you do. That frightens liars every single time. And then there's a really, really simple mantra that almost everybody can remember. No. That's it. No. No, you will not hurt me. No, you will not rob me. No, you will not lie to me. No, you will not cheat me. No, you will not take my home. No, you will not take my job. No, you will not take my money. No. As far as mind control goes, mind control is based on words and symbols. I mean, what's language? You make a sound, and the sound means something to you. Because in that language, that sound means the same to everybody. As I mentioned earlier, I was invited by the son of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the original Star Trek, after Mr. Roddenberry died. His son Eugene, I had been introduced to him. He did this documentary, allowed me to say thank you to his father. And he and his business partner invited me to the closing party for the last Star Trek TV show, Star Trek Enterprise. And so I went, not being a big party guy. These guys have been nice to me, so the very least I could do is go to their party and say, thank you again. Now, I've been in Star Trek since 1969. I am what we used to call a Trekkie, someone who liked and grew up with the original show. Somewhere along the line, the next generation of Star Trek people became Trekkers. I didn't really care. I stopped going to Star Trek conventions a long time ago because after a while, it's just so sad to see these people dress up in Spock ears and things and expect the world to change and just be handed to them without them actually doing anything to deserve it. So there I am at the closing party for Star Trek Enterprise. And I'm a Star Trek guy. I've been in Star Trek since 1969. I figured, I'd fit right in. No. I immediately discovered that I spoke the wrong Star Trek language. The people who were into Star Trek at that point, in this today, spoke an entirely different form of English, an entirely different form of Star Trek that I didn't speak. And instantly, I was not welcome. Instantly. All the concepts that Gene Roddenberry had talked about, tolerance, patience, kindness, openness, we are stronger because we're different. Then, how does it go? We are made stronger because of our differences, not because of our sameness. All these concepts that Gene Roddenberry talked about, none of these people knew. This was their language. This was their clique. Star Trek belonged to them, and anyone who didn't speak their version of Star Trek, their version of the English language, was wrong. Different forms of English. If you do not speak their version of English, you are wrong, you do not belong, you are the enemy. And so I just went into the screening room where they were playing Star Trek and Star Trek related videos all day, and I just sat there alone. Eugene Roddenberry very kindly came in and said hi, and his business partner came in and said hi. I didn't know what to say to them because I had been completely shunned by what I thought were my people. Years later, I went to New Zealand. And the people of New Zealand, it sounds like English. It isn't. They have developed their own form of the English language. They make sounds that are known to you and I, but the sounds when I make it mean one thing, and the sounds when they make it, the words they speak, to a New Zealander means something else. And please, it's very important that you understand, when I talk about New Zealanders, I'm talking about the people who are still in New Zealand. For the last 40 years, the best and the brightest of the New Zealand people have realized what I'm telling you now and have fled their country never to return. The only people who are bright and capable in New Zealand today are such a small minority, you could probably count them on the fingers of one hand, and they're there only because their families are there. It really gets down to, if the best and the brightest of your people have left the country for the last 40 years, who's left? The morons. And so the morons, the Mandarin class of New Zealand, who rule the country just for whoever happens to own New Zealand, the morons stay because they know they're useless. A moron knows what it is. It knows it's a moron, and it knows what it can do and what it cannot do. The morons who have stayed in New Zealand know they can't go anywhere else because they are morons. But even morons know when a ship is sinking. I actually have run in at least one encounter with a New Zealand moron in Prague. He had conned his way into becoming the country manager of an international recruiting company. And his European staff was puzzled and mystified and terrified of him. You know, I've chatted about this before. Whenever they confronted him with reality, he really, literally, he became a cartoon figure. It literally looked to them like his head was swelling up like a balloon. His face got beet red. His neck would get really, 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 really small. And it looked like he was enraged to the point where he was going to attack everybody. I assured the nice Polish lady who worked at the company there that he would not do that because, New Zealanders are cowards. And the only way one of his kind would attack her, a girl, was if he was standing in front of her and 7 of his best friends were sneaking up behind her with empty beer bottles, which of course is the New Zealanders' preferred weapon. So when I say that New Zealand is the most programmed, most socially engineered country that I've ever seen, I'm talking about those who are still there, who are there trapped by their own devices. And even though the people of New Zealand are beautifully controlled, you can ask, and I fell for this myself, you can ask 100 New Zealanders the same question. And I know from personal experience, I know for a fact, that if you ask 100 New Zealanders the same question, you will get exactly the same answer. And when I first noticed this phenomena, I thought, gee, this must be great. It must be true. Everybody says the same thing to me. No. Because if you ask 5 people in Germany the same question, you're going to get 5 completely different answers. If you ask 5 people in the United States the same question, you're going to get 5 totally different answers. It never occurred to me that anybody could be controlled to the point where you ask 100 New Zealanders the exact same question and you get exactly the same answer. And even though they are beautifully controlled, beautifully programmed, they are very, very angry. Because as far as I can tell, the problem with mass mind control is that people, even morons, know that something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. But they have been programmed, shattering the link between the rational mind and the emotional mind. It's that break in between where programming is inserted. Even as well programmed as they are very, very angry. I've never seen such anger. I've never seen such rage. I've certainly never seen such violence as I saw in New Zealand. And I came from Hollywood. I came from New York. But rage is everywhere in these people. It's the zombie effect. And it works better in a crowd because mind control works when you separate the rational mind from the emotional mind. You insert the program in between where the break is, and then people together reinforce it against each other. At one point in time, I thought New Zealand was the future of the United States, if the United States had a future that extended more than 20 or 30 years. But that's not true. The United States today is New Zealand. The number of people who are actually standing up for their rights in the United States is hardly noticeable. The last time the people of the United States stood up and took their country back was over 200 years ago. But even then, they needed 5% of the population to care. Just 5% of the population was all they needed. Today in the United States, with the proven New Zealand mind control techniques, the social engineering, I don't even see a fraction of 1% of the population waking up. And with so few people aware, linking the rational mind with the emotional mind, seeing the world the way it really is, I don't see anything that can be done to take our Western world back. I don't. I mean, December 2000, we could have done it, and easily done it, without bloodshed, without a drop of blood being spilled. But that moment came and went. And nothing I did or said or tried to do made any difference. I saw the moment come, I saw the moment go. And as usual, I'm just, mystified and puzzled, so I went to talk to somebody who I knew also knew the truth. And I was going to pay him money. I wanted to pay him for his time. I wanted the truth. And I met him at his little office, and he looked at me. He says, "Charlie, I'm not taking your money. You know the truth as well as I do. You don't need me for this." I never saw him again. I mean, today, and this is, again, personal experiences. I only talk to you about personal experiences, or experiences that people I know really, really well have had. Today, I have friends in the States who have lost their jobs, who are owed weeks, maybe months of back pay, and they don't do anything. I mean, the electricity has been turned off in their homes, and they're forced to move back in with their parents. The banks have been trying so hard to foreclose on their homes, it's beyond any kind of rational thought. But these people, the zombie effect, they just lay down and take it. They will not fight back. They're like those 50 New Zealanders sitting in those chairs, those 50 puppets on one string. Unless the puppet master moves them, they won't move. It's the zombie effect. They will not think for themselves. They will not connect the rational mind with what they see to the emotional mind. This is, "I don't believe it." Well, you've got to. They will not stand up and join their neighbors, their family, their friends, and say no more. Because as cattle, the concept is, if it's not happening to me personally, then it's not important to me. Now, the fact that you're next in line to be slaughtered at the slaughterhouse because you are cattle, it doesn't even occur to anyone. I mean, the banks have been violently foreclosing on every home that they can, even though they know they cannot resell these homes. Even though the owners of these homes are making payments, it's not much, but at least it's something. So the rational mind says the bank will not foreclose on me because I am making payments and they couldn't possibly get anything for this house by selling it because no one would buy it. The emotional mind hopes and has faith that that's true. No. Banks are foreclosing to this day on people's homes. And what are the banks going to do with those homes? Well, in California, and you can look this up online, there is one company that does nothing but bulldoze over and flatten houses that have been foreclosed upon, with all the personal possessions in the world still inside. The banks are not even pretending that they're going to try and get their money back. All they're doing is flattening these homes. The rational mind says that doesn't make any sense. Even as you're standing there with your own eyes and see your home demolished. The emotional mind is saying, that's my home. My heart is breaking. This cannot be happening. And that locks us into nothing. That locks us into doing nothing. It's the essence of mind control. You split the mind from the rational mind from the emotional mind. Break the heart, kill the spirit, control the mind. The zombie effect. And again, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's very real. And again, like in all of our chats, I have seen this with my own eyes. One time too many to ignore it. And I'm the slowest guy in the world. And I'm not trying to be modest. I'm slow. I'm dumber than dirt. So if I can see this, it must be very real. After I admitted defeat to myself in New Zealand, the old witch who shows up in my life every once in a while convinced me to fly to Prague, the Czech Republic. I personally had picked Buenos Aires, Argentina, where, again, I was told that they loved people from the United States, and they had a booming IT business. And as usual, the old witch was right, up to a point. Turns out it was a good thing I didn't go to Buenos Aires, because in Buenos Aires, in the culture there, if you're not with a corporation by the age of 30, you're never going to get a job. Now, all of my South American friends knew this, and they tried so hard to talk me out of going there. But they couldn't budge me because, well, I'm stupid. But they did go out of their way to make sure that I'd be okay once I got there. A friend of mine arranged for me to stay with his family in Mendoza, not Buenos Aires, which is where he was from, because apparently it's one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and he should know. He used to live there. But then the old witch showed up. I call her Alice. I call her Alice because it pisses her off. She shows up, as she does every couple of years, and this time she actually spoke to me politely, which was a first. Convinced me to go to the Czech Republic instead. She painted such a beautiful picture of the place, that they love Americans there, and they have a booming IT industry, plus, again, she was being polite to me, which, after 40-some-odd years, was a first. And frankly, none of the ideas I'd had lately were any good, so I went with it. Again, she told me that I would find my true job, and that I would meet the true loves of my life. And, as always, to sell a lie, you got to tell a lot of truth and then sneak the lie in under the bottom. Yes, I absolutely met my soulmate in Prague. I met she and her girlfriend, her lover, the true loves of my life. What wasn't mentioned to me was they were going to make me suffer in ways that I could not even believe possible. My soulmate and her girlfriend, her lover, hurt me in ways that I did not think, did not know, did not even realize I could be hurt. They raped the soul out of my body every single night and then laughed about it the next day. And every day, over and over, to this day, a year later, my emotional mind still asks the question, how could anybody do that? Well, my rational mind knows the answer because they could, because they enjoyed it, because it was fun. And the fact, of course, that I was there to love them forever gave them unlimited access to me. And again, that unlimited access allowed them to hurt me in ways that were too fun to pass up. And of course, I grew up with experiencing that kind of fun with the tribes, the gangs, the street thugs that I was placed with by our good, close personal friends with the CIA. And that's the core of mind control. Again, shatter the link between the rational mind that sees the world as it is and the emotional mind that is our buffer from experiencing the horrors of reality. And in between those two extremes, that break in the middle, is where our masters can insert any kind of programming they want. It's the difference between the rational mind and the emotional mind, the spirit, the soul, is how they control us, program us, the zombie effect. Split the rational mind from the emotional mind, and you can control anyone. Because we cannot believe that anyone would do that to us, even as we see them doing it with our own eyes. Our emotional mind says, no, it's not possible. The rational mind explains it. The emotional mind rejects it. And at that break point, where our masters work on us, that split inside of us where we are at war with ourselves, that's how we are controlled. And the point of it is it's in all of us. It's who we are. Personally, I don't even think I have emotions anymore. I mean, besides sadness, I don't even feel lonely anymore. I honestly don't feel anything. And for me, that's a vast improvement. So now, when a girl tries to break my heart, I'm just sad, a little sadder. I suppose it's because my rational mind and my emotional mind are now, at least today, in complete agreement. There's no such thing as hope. There is no such thing as faith. I need to know. Now, I just accept things the way they are. Yes, she tried to break my heart. Okay. Time to go home, time for dinner. Think I'll have a chocolate bar for dessert. And that's about it. Which, of course, the same thing would have crippled me years ago. The last time it's crippled me for 6 months. And even now, a year later, I'm still asking the question, how could anybody do that? Because in social engineering, our masters use faith and hope. In politics, in religion, in government, those beautiful lies they tell us, and the ugly truths we cannot allow ourselves to see. Even as our homes are bulldozed in front of our eyes, our jobs are pulled out from under our feet, and we're dumped in the street and left to die. And it's into that battle for our lives. That's where we lose. Faith wants us to believe in something that we do not know anything about. And hope is the guarantee we give ourselves that things will work out, no matter how horrible the things are we're seeing done right in front of our eyes. But it gets back to break the heart, kill the spirit, control the mind. The zombie effect. No one can fight back who has lost the will to live. May you live as long as you wish. May you love as long as you live. For the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel fighting his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race, their black magic, captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.